Welcome to Fitzdog Radio. It's a beautiful... I'm taping this a little bit early this week because I'm traveling. As always, pleasure trip, though, this week. I'm going up to see my daughter. I'm going to go visit her. And it's only been a month since she left for college, but that's not too soon to go see her, is it? That's not clingy. That's not too pathetic and needy. I miss her. I can't wait to see her. So we're going to go see her this weekend. So I'm not going to have time to record a podcast. So anyway, here it is. Here is Fitzdog Radio. My guest today is a guy you may or may not heard of. He's been on the podcast before. His name is Mike Sachs, and he's a great writer. He writes about comedy, and he is a comedic writer, and he's got a new book out. And we're going to talk about comedy a little bit. But we were talking about on Sunday Papers, which I don't know if you guys all listen to it. If I gotta guess everybody who listens to Fitzdog Radio now subscribes to Sunday Papers. If not, do it. It comes out on Sundays. It's me and Mike Gibbons, and we're coming up on a couple years of doing it now. And one of the story we read the news, and one of the stories that came up this week was about a nun who had embezzled and spent the money gambling. She had a gambling problem, and it really just makes you laugh because it shouldn't. But I mean, just because you're part of a religious order doesn't mean you're not a sinner. Would you say they sin less? I mean, depends on what your book of sins is. It maybe, everybody's got a different set of commandments, but certainly the 10 commandments that this woman was living by, do not steal. It doesn't say do not gamble. It doesn't. But I would say even in spite of that, I would say that a Christian is a gambler. You are by your very essence somebody that gambles, that says, especially a nun, you're saying that I believe that this thing is going to happen against horrible odds, against all the odds of science. A nun is saying that they will take a vow. Here's what they're going to wager. They're going to wager their poverty, their chastity, their obedience. They're putting all that on the line. They're risking all of that for the payoff that they're going to go to heaven, that they're going to go to this place where apparently you are not going to be chased. I gotta get. Is that part of the deal as a nun? Do you think that if you're chased now, you will be just? I'm not going to be nasty about nuns. I can't. I was raised Irish Catholic. I have too much respect for the nuns to say anything defamatory. But would it be Fuckfest 2022 if you were a good nun and you went up there? Would it be just meat on Fridays, like big ribs and fucking lamb and whatever flesh you wanted? And sex and booze. Would you get it all? Because you bet it all. You walked the walk. You didn't just talk about it like most Catholics. You did a life of service. And you don't know if you're going to be a winner because there are no winners that we know of. There is no proven ascension. There is no person in heaven that has picked up the phone, you'd think that they would have by now, and said, hey, by the way, yes, it's true. If you live a holy life, you will go to heaven, and there is joy unimaginable to you. There is bliss, there is peace, there's serenity, there is divinity, there is grace, all of it, all the time. You can sleep. You want to sleep? You can sleep. You probably don't want to because you're going to miss stuff. And you don't go through the mood swings of being human where you can only feel joy if you're also feeling equal parts pain. Isn't that part of the quotient here as a human? Is that it can't all be joy? It can't all be happiness? That you have to keep going down to the bottom of the pool and touching the bottom and feeling darkness and cold, so that you can then have spring happen and have joy happen. But maybe heaven, you can stay, and it's for us hard to wrap our heads around that you can just stay happy. You're talking to somebody who has depression, so maybe this is more acute for me than for some, but there's no winner's circle for Catholics, you know? And what you're giving up is a low-paying job, which is thankless. I mean, the nuns are the ones that they can't say mass, they can't perform the transfiguration of the communion, they can't do much. I mean, they're basically like assistants. They're like the magician's assistant, and they never get to do the trick. They clean up. They're part of their big part of their job is they're supposed to pray for the priests. That's a big part of a nun's duty. You're like a cheerleader. You're like a Catholic cheerleader. CHRIST. Go Christ. Go Father McDonough. Go Father O'Malley. And then just clean up after the mass. And then make their beds and do their laundry and clean up their blast rags that are probably laying all around the... I don't want to be nasty. But, you know, it's not like you're ever... There's only been one famous nun, real nun. I mean, there's been make-believe nuns, but like Mother Teresa is the only nun that you can name. You can't name another one. Go ahead. I'll give you an hour. Mother Teresa was a fucking rock star. If you were not around during the 70s, I would imagine she was big in the 60s, 70s, 80s. She was huge. I mean, People magazine covered Mother Teresa. And she could have, and what a life for being a rock star, for being the Beyonce of her day. She was surrounded by poor people that had lice and were hungry and were grabbing at her. That's it. She could have left that. She was so big, she could have left the nunhood, got an agent, come to Hollywood, got an agent, and signed a 3-picture deal. She could have gotten, you think Oprah's big? Yeah. Cute, Oprah. That's cute. But stay tuned for Mother Teresa, who is going to cure people. And but that would be fun. What if she did become a celebrity and then she was like, fuck poor people. Like, she just did not want to be around poverty. She was so over poverty. She would just want, she'd just be rich, and I don't know. I guess she would break out and maybe she could start dating. I don't know who, whatever. But it is weird because she was a mother superior. And that's the weird thing about nuns, is that they have they're very low down, but yet there is the superior one. Oh, you think you're better than everybody else? Yeah. I'm Mother Superior. It's in my fucking name. Superior. So why don't you go rinse the chalice and polish the crosses? I'm going to get a mani-pedi. But what I always thought was kind of cruel was the outfits that the nuns wore. They didn't all wear them, because I went to CCD classes in church, and there were nuns that wore regular clothing. But then sometimes they wore the full nun outfits. But like, it's not really that much different than a burqa. I mean, we give Muslims so much shit about putting their women's in burqas, and the nun habit and whatever they call the rest of the outfit, it's the same thing. It's covering every inch of flesh on your body. The nun habit's got there's an opening, there's a sunlight. It's a burqa with a sunlight. And it's still saying, don't look at me as a female. Don't see me as a woman. See me as a servant of God. I'm sexless. And part of that for some people, I think, is kind of sexy. You know, like there was Sally Field played a nun. What was that TV show? There was a TV show in the 60s, The Flying Nun, with Sally Field, who was just the most adorable, cute, and sexy woman. And you gotta think that not all priests are gay. I think a lot of them are gay. A lot are not. The ones in my town were not gay because I found out later that some of them were having affairs with some of the women parishioners. Yes, you heard it here. And if they're not gay, you got to think the sexual tension between a priest and a nun wearing those outfits and being told you can't have sexual thoughts about each other. And then, of course, you're going to have a sexual thought about the person. You know, they're not wearing anything sexy. I mean, I'm sure they're not wearing perfume. I doubt a nun can wear perfume because there can't be any nonsense. Come on, everybody. Nonsense. The new perfume from L'Oreal for when you want to get busy in the rectory or the rectum. But I remember there was a TV show called The Thorn Birds. It was a miniseries when I was a kid, and it was about a priest in New Zealand, and he got busy with a woman, and it was all about the forbidden love, and it was the sexiest show you've ever seen. And I just got to think, you know, and then I did once watch a porn. I forget what it was called. I think it was called Sacred Flesh. And it was I don't know if you call it a porn movie, or it was one of those horror movies that had a lot of nudity and sexuality in it. And the whole premise was it was about a very sexual church with nuns that were getting nasty with each other, getting naked. And I'm telling you, these nuns were, these were beautiful women. I mean, everything about me was saying, don't watch this. You shouldn't be watching this. And I mean, you know, tearing each other's clothes off. And one of the women is naked, and they tie her to the cross and then go down on her. And you gotta think when you're that, and I know porn actresses, probably a lot of them had tough childhoods, but you have to fall pretty far from the flock to agree to get tied to a cross and eaten out by a woman dressed as a nun. That's when you got to really believe that there's no heaven. You have to not believe there's any possibility there's a God, because that's going to be a serious meeting at the pearly gates with St. Peter. We just want to check out some footage of you in a little film called Sacred Flesh. What were you thinking? What are the famous nuns? There was, there was the nun on Airplane, the movie Airplane. You remember she was playing guitar for the girl who was hooked up to tubes on the plane, and she starts playing wildly and knocks out the tubes. And then she's slapping the hysterical passenger. There was that nun. I mean, nuns are good comedy. Seeing a nun is very exciting. And look, again, I'm very Catholic, so it's a bigger deal for me. But spotting a nun in the wild is it's like Pokemon Go or seeing a little person. It's like it makes you happy. It makes you feel good. Like, oh my God, look, I spotted one. And they have a sense of humor. There's jokes. I remember being a kid, and I remember telling a lot of nun jokes. Here, I made a list. I looked up some nun jokes online, and it is a pretty big genre of jokes. There's a lot of nun jokes. Oh, by the way, the other thing about nuns, I remember there was a book. There's a writer named Khalil Gibran. Gibran, I think it's Gibran. He is Lebanese. He's from like 150 years ago, 100 years ago. And we had all his books in my house when I was growing up. And when I was little, I used to read these Khalil Gibran books. There's one called The Prophet, which is incredible. It's very mystical and beautiful. And in it, there was a short story about some nuns that were living in a nunnery in the desert, and some soldiers came through, and they were marauders, and they came into the convent, and they ate all the food, and they stole everything, and then they were going to rape the nuns. And so the first nun said, you take me first, but before you take me, I want to make you safe because you're still one of God's creatures and you're going into battle, and I want you to be safe. I have a special holy water, and when you wipe it on yourself, you cannot be stabbed. It makes you impervious to the sword. And the guy says, I don't buy that. And she goes, you don't buy it? Believe me. Look, I'll rub it on my neck. And she takes it, and she wipes it all over the front of her neck. And she goes, now take your sword and slash me across the throat, and it will not do any damage. So he unsheathes his sword, he puts it against her neck, and he says, are you sure this will work? And she says, yes, this is consecrated by God. And so he cuts across her throat bursts open in blood, she falls to the ground, and she dies, but she dies a virgin for God. And then all the soldiers fled because to kill a nun was the worst. You could rape them, apparently, but to kill them. And so they fled. And so she saved all the other nuns and her own virginity. How about that? Even though I know a lot of my listeners are virgins, but that's not by choice. Why would I make fun of you guys? You're my listeners. So anyway, here's some nun jokes. I met a nun that wiped her nose on her clothes. She had a nasty habit. A guy runs into a bar and he yells, quick, how tall is a penguin? Bartender says, 3 feet tall. Guy says, oh my God, I just ran over a nun. Good acting on that one. What do you call a sleepwalking nun? A Roman Catholic. Roman? Do you know how many women have been pope? None. I know a nun who says her nightly prayers in the shower. She does it out of habit. All right, that's enough. That's enough. If you want to hear real jokes, real stand-up comedy style jokes, I will be in Lexington, Kentucky on February 24th through the 26th, Omaha on February 27th, Baltimore, just announcing this date. It's a fallout, so it's last minute, but I will be at Magooby's in Baltimore March 3rd through the 5th. And then St. Patrick's Day, the big show, the annual show at the Hollywood Improv. We do it every year. We always get some big names to come out. We have a lot of fun. That's March 17th at the Hollywood Improv. Spokane, Washington, April 14th through 16th. Then I will be in New Orleans on April 21st. Lafayette, Louisiana, April 22nd. Tacoma, Washington, May 19th through 21. Don't forget, get yourself the premium membership. We're getting up close to 1,000 episodes. You can get them all for like less than $1.70 a month or something crazy. Support the show. Become a premium member. Go to Fitzdog.com to get that and all tickets. Also, I want you guys to get your meat on. I'm a meat eater. And this sponsor means a lot to me because America's online butcher is Good Chop. And they give you a flexible monthly subscription plan. It's high-quality American meat and seafood. You can get yourself the medium or the large plan. And enjoy your favorite cuts of beef, chicken, pork, and seafood, delivered flash frozen for freshness and sealed with dry ice inside an insulated box. Now listen, I had a ribeye with the wife last night. It made us both... I think it released pheromones, and we ended up making, let's just say we ended up making love after the ribeye. I don't know if it's coincidence, but thank you, Good Chop, for that. You support local farms, independent ranchers here in the U.S. Everything is from the good old U.S. of A. They prize itself on that. They have no antibiotics, no added hormones, no artificial ingredients, only good natural meat. 100% money-back guarantee, so you don't have to worry about if you don't love it as much as I do. You will not have to get a guarantee. You will fall in love with this meat. This will change your life. Big portions. We got, we're empty nesters now, but there's the big pieces of meat. Go to goodchop.com/Fitzdog100 and use Fitzdog100 to get $100 off your first 3 boxes. Don't forget, go to goodchop.com/Fitzdog100. Use code Fitzdog100 to get $100 off your first 3 boxes. Good Chop, America's online butcher. All right, couple quick overheards and then we'll get to it. This is from Obvious Irony. He overheard, it was at 2:55 a.m. on Christmas morning. Right outside my window, I hear a sobbing, guttural female voice. Quote, "You fuck. I gave up everything for you. I gave up drugs for you." Well, that's not so bad, is it? You can always go back. That's the thing about drugs, is you haven't really lost any time. You know, it's like, I gave up my law degree for you. Yeah, that's something that's going to be tough to pick up again. But those drugs, they're right there. Adam Bean, a baby boomer at Starbucks. The barista says, "What's your favorite concert you've ever been to?" The boomer said, "Ever hear of Jethro Tull?" Barista says, "No." That's it. That's how that conversation ends. Tim Gibbs, heard at the Victoria Point Tavern just outside of Brisbane, Queensland, the city hosting the 2032 Olympic Games. Chickpeas can actually fuck off for good. That's the way they talk over there in Queensland. Chickpeas can actually fuck off for good. I can't do an Australian accent. Wait, is Queensland Australia or New Zealand? I think it's New Zealand, actually. God, Americans don't know the difference between Australia and New Zealand. We really don't. And I apologize. I don't apologize. Get bigger. Populate yourselves. Develop a few more cities. And then we'll memorize your cities. But Brisbane. Now, Brisbane, I think, is Australia. I don't know. I don't care. I went to Australia once and I fucking loved it. I can't wait to go back, but it's a long way. Joanne Bates Crimmins says, overheard in an elevator in a casino in Atlantic City, guy on a cell phone, quote, "Yeah, I can't go there. I was up $50,000 at the sports book, and then I was down $29,000 on blackjack. Pit boss came over, asked me for my social security number. I said, you can shove my social security number up your ass." You know you're making a lot of money when you can talk to a pit boss like that, because usually those guys are intimidating. But when you're throwing 50 G's around in Atlantic City, of all places, and Atlantic City, I'm surprised we don't get more overheards from there, because that is a warped, it's a place I love and hate at the same time, because it is, it's got the Springsteen Jersey vibe. It's down and dirty and it's real and I like it. But it's also, in the winter, the saddest place on the planet. All right. Here we go. Let's get to it. Oh, my God. Time's a-wasting. My guest is Mike Sachs. He's got a new book called Passing on the Right, My Ups, My Downs, My Lefts, My Rights, My Wrongs, and My Career So Far in This Bizarro World of Comedy, the Skippy Battison Story. It is very, very funny, the parts I read. I didn't read the whole book, but he's sending it to me. But I've read his other books. Here's The Kicker and Poking a Dead Frog, and they're phenomenal. This is a guy who's a major writer. He's written for the New Yorker. Over these years, he writes a lot for the New Yorker, McSweeney's, Esquire, Salon, Vanity Fair, GQ, Vice, New York Times, Washington Post. He's a very respected writer and a very funny guy, and I loved having him on. Had him on a couple days ago, and I hope you enjoy the interview with the great Mike Sachs. Welcome, beaming in from the other coast, Mike Sachs in New York City. What's happening, brother?
Hey, man. How you doing? You're a New Yorker.
I am a New Yorker, yeah. Born and raised, and 22 years in L.A. now, but I miss New York every day.
Not this time of year, you don't.
I know. It's actually 80 degrees out today.
Yeah, it is bleak here in February, as you know.
Right. So wait, so the last time you were on was 10, 11 years ago?
Yeah, it was 2011.
Right.
And I didn't know you, you didn't know me, but you were nice enough to have me on. And I showed up, and I was sitting in the waiting area. You had no idea who I was, didn't even notice me. And either a producer or someone else came by and said, "Who's on your show today?" And you said, "I don't know, some author who wrote something." And since then, that's become an in-joke among me and my friends. Whenever we see an author on TV, it's like, "Who is that?" I don't know. Some author who wrote something. Had no idea who I was.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'll tell you something. Now I know who you are. My bookshelf is lined with your books. I got all your books.
Oh, nice. Look at that.
They are
Bibles.
Bibles for comedy writers. If you want to know how to write a joke, what a beat is, what a turn is, literally everything that you could want to know about comedy writing is in the annals of these books. In particular, I'll say, and here's the kicker, which Dick Cavett was one of my favorite interviews on that one, and Poking a Dead Frog. These are interviews with some of the top comic minds of all time.
Thank you so much. I mean, that means a lot coming from you. I mean, the whole purpose of writing that book was I was hugely into comedy as a kid, but there weren't really many books that I could find growing up. Either it was about your show of shows, which is fine, or SNL, but very few books with the writers that I liked, writing for Late Night or, Mr. Show or any of those current type of comedies. So I wanted to reach out to these people, just sort of pick their brains, sort of in a selfish way. What would you recommend young writers starting out? What would you recommend they do, and what would you recommend they not do? And I wanted that advice too. And with a lot of these writers, I knew they were getting towards the end of their careers. And I knew that there wasn't really much time to talk with them. For instance, Irv Brecker, who wrote for the Marx Brothers as a kid. And
wow, that's amazing.
It is amazing. I mean, it reminded me of, there was someone in D.C. where I grew up named Shirley Povich, who was actually Maury Povich's father. And this guy was a sports writer from the early 20th century, and he had memories. He lived for a long time. He had memories of interviewing Ty Cobb, Lou Gehrig, this bridge to another time that didn't exist anymore. And when he died, those stories went with him. So I thought, there's not many writers out there now who wrote for the Marx Brothers, wrote for early radio, and I would love to connect with them before it's too late. Quite a few of the people I interviewed for the first book have passed away, and I just feel very fortunate to have been able to talk with someone like
get it on the
Brecker.
Record. People can always learn from them. And what is the thing? I would just ask you, like, out of the gate, what is the trait or characteristic that you most frequently see when you're interviewing, like, the Bob Odenkirks of the world and the, David Sedaris's of the world, and these people that are such Stephen Merchant and Jack Handy, like, what do they possess, or what do you notice in them that is different than regular people?
Well, I mean, first of all, there are
Or
similarities.
Greg Fitzsimmons. I would say Greg Fitzsimmons should be in that list.
He's definitely needs to be in that list. I think I reached out to you. You never got back to me.
That's not true.
That's not true. No. What I have noticed among these writers is a sense of goodness. And I know that sounds a little woo-woo, but Bob Odenkirk, David Sedaris, Stephen Merchant, Jack Handy, these are all very decent people who were willing to talk to me. I mean, if you weren't willing to talk to me, you obviously didn't make the book. So there is a sense of them willing to talk about their craft, about their history, and give advice to younger writers. And there really is a sense of, they're in it for the right reasons. They didn't get into it for the money. They got into it because they love comedy and they felt they had no other choice. And they remained in it for the right reasons. You have someone like Bob Odenkirk. He's just a very decent guy. There's a lot of people in comedy, I don't know if you know this, who are not that decent.
Right. Yeah, no, there are a lot, but it's true with stand-up comedians as well. There are very few douchebags that make it to a certain level in stand-up comedy. I think there's, I should ask you, why do you think that is?
Well, I think this is what I learned from the books. One of the biggest recommendations from any of the people I interviewed is don't be an asshole. You can be the most talented person on earth, but no one's going to want to sit in a writing room with you for 10 hours a day for 2 years if you're an asshole. Plus, I also think that to create comedy that lasts, you have to be a decent person. You can't be an asshole like, I forget his name, from Fox, who goes to bus depots and Chinatown and mocks the people who are down there. If you are creating comedy, I think you have to have sort of a decency.
Yeah.
And if you are an asshole, I think it is harder. It's hard to hide that as certainly as a stand-up and even as a writer.
Yeah, I mean, there certainly were famous assholes. Like you hear about Milton Berle being very difficult, very insulting and condescending. I mean, I think when the ego gets too big, part of comedy, I think, is also that your ego can't get that big because in the end, you still have to be the lens that people are seeing life through. And if you're putting your lens up too high, presuming that you're better than the average person isn't going to relate to it.
No, and actually that goes for interviewing too, because if someone thinks they're too good to be interviewed, no one knew who I was when I reached out. They were just
What were your
enough.
credits at that point?
Well, I mean, I was writing for Vanity Fair and starting to write for New Yorker, but they didn't know me from Adam, really. I just said, and these books, when I wrote the first book, these books really didn't exist. I mean, there was nothing really to compare it to. And also they're long form interviews. They're Playboy length. These aren't short web interviews. So they take a long, long time. So just the fact that they were decent enough to give me their time, and some of these interviews took weeks, shows what type of person they are. Also, they remember what it was like to start off, And this is what always shocks me when I see successful people who don't seem to remember what it was like to be a kid and not know how to go from point A to point B, when it seemed magical, when it seemed almost like landing on Mars. Like, how do you do it? How do you do comedy? How do you get into it?
Right.
And these people just never seem to forget that, which I really appreciated.
Have you interviewed Judd Apatow? Because he had a very similar experience when he was a college student. No, I think he was a high school student.
He was a high school student.
Yeah, he started interviewing people like Gary Shandling and Jerry Seinfeld and Jay Leno, and he found the same thing, that they were very generous with. I mean, you at least had the credits of working in some major publications. He was a high school student, and they spoke with him.
It's astonishing. I mean, when I read those interviews he conducted as a high schooler, I mean, how mature are those interviews? It's incredible. And the balls it took to reach out to these people.
Yeah.
I did reach out to Judd numerous times, and he did give me a little bit for, I think it was Poking a Dead Frog, but it didn't work out as far as a long interview.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to talk to him because you guys should speak. You're too similar.
I love him, and I never really have talked to him. I don't know what it is, but I would love to meet him. I think he's fantastic.
Yeah, he's and he's also like you. I think he is. I've never seen anyone love comedy and comedians and respect the craft as much as he does, but it comes through in your work as well.
Well, he knows that. He knows stand-up. I've never done stand-up. I mean, for me, this was always about writers. Like,
right.
The scroll at the end of Late Night, like I memorized that scroll. Like, how does one do that? How does one become a professional comedy writer? And that was a great thing about these books, especially talking with like a Peg Lynch, who was writing at the age of 14, 15 for the local radio station. She was 96 when I interviewed her, and she basically invented the modern sitcom. But certainly she didn't get into it for the money. She just sort of, through her own will, just like made it happen. And to me, I just find that fascinating, that if you want something bad enough for the right reasons, hopefully it'll work out for you. And that's really the theme I wanted in the book. If you want to get into comedy, it's something you can do. It doesn't have to be impossible, and it can be for anyone. Anyone can do it. There are just certain things you need to do and certain things you shouldn't do.
Aren't you leaving out the component of you have to be funny?
Well, I don't know how funny anyone was when they were a kid, right? I mean, you made your friends laugh, or I made my friends laugh.
Yeah.
But when I look back at some of the early things I wrote, you just want to hide under the sofa. I mean, it's horrendous. I do think there needs to be something there. You can't just create something from out of nothing. But I do think that I wouldn't, a lot of people want to get into it and they don't feel that they're funny enough and they don't have the confidence. It seems when most people who succeed just have that confidence, and that is what I want to get out there. It's like, even if you're in Australia or you're a girl in Ohio, it doesn't matter who you are or where you are, you can do this now, and you can make it, and certainly put out what you want to do, how you want to make it out into the world, which is something that has never existed before.
Well, there's so many different ways to get it out, but there is definitely a glut of people getting into comedy. And I feel for young comics, young comedy writers, comedy actors. There is just so many people who are, and good for them, and will probably net more diversity, that's for sure. I mean, just like more female writers. You've seen, just like, looking at your book, like it was the cover of and here's the kicker, there's 2 women out of 20, and that's just because that's what TV was like, in the burgeoning days of TV comedy writing. I mean, SNL had no female writers; they had a couple, and I've worked on many staffs that had no female writers. How are you seeing that change in the last how many years?
Well, it's been
10?
Now 14 years since I started the first book.
Yeah.
And tremendous change, which is, thank God. How many Harvard Lampoon guys do you want to see out there writing comedy? And you're right, it is a glut. I mean, it's just, there's a tremendous amount of talent out there. And, not all of it's going to be good. But through that, you're going to get these projects like Pen 15, which I think is a work of genius that never would have been on years ago, which I think is great for comedy. I mean, it's necessary for comedy. I mean, you point out the number of women for that first book. One of the things, my frustrations with that first book is there weren't that many female comedy writers who could talk at Playboy interview length about their careers. And if there were, I certainly reached out to them. But what I found at that time was there were so few that they were being reached out to quite a bit.
Right.
And quite a few said no. So it did come down to, I did reach out, and they didn't have to say yes. It's obviously their choice. But in the end, there were much fewer opportunities for me at that time to find. Now, if I were to write a book like this again, it would be, I think the majority would be women.
Yeah, it's the same thing when I produce stand-up comedy shows, or when I'm trying to, sometimes I write on a show where if I'm the showrunner or the head writer and I'm hiring people, and people go, well, there's not enough women. Well, because the women that are good, that are out there, are being deluged with offers. And it's very difficult to, how hard it is to book a female comic on a stand-up show? They're all busy. Unless you book them 6 months in advance for good money. You're not going to get, well, whatever. I'm not going to name the names, but there's just comics that are hard to get.
Very hard to get, and they didn't know who I was, and why the fuck would they want to spend a few weeks of their time talking to me for a book they didn't know anything about? I totally understand it, But I did receive a little blowback at that time. But I do want to make clear, I did try to reach out, because you don't want it all white, male, middle age.
Right.
I mean, to me, that doesn't provoke any interest. And I have a daughter now. I would love for her to get into, who God knows it would be a difficult path, but she's funny, and I wouldn't want her ever prevented from getting a job because she was a female. And that would have certainly happened as few as 10, 15 years ago.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. What now what about I didn't seem to track down. I was researching you a little bit, and did you ever write for TV?
No, I've written only, I got into print to write for TV, to be discovered, to be pulled up. Like you would to the major leagues.
Yeah.
I just didn't know. And of course that's never happened. But by doing that, I ended up really enjoying writing for print, for articles, for magazines, and then later for audio productions. But, I have friends who write for TV, and I can, obviously, it's not always as fun as it might look in the on television,
when you're not working all you want and you obsess about getting a job, and then within 1 week you're like, this fucking sucks.
Right. Yeah. Right. Sitting in a room with or styrofoam boxes, takeout boxes, and takeout menus.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
if you're with the right people, it's absolutely magic. And I've been on magic shows that I didn't want to end. When I was on Lucky Louie on HBO with this incredible writing staff, and, Cedric the Entertainer Presents, which was a phenomenal writing staff, and John Bowman, rest his soul, just passed away, was the showrunner who I learned so much from. But then you're on other shows where you are watching the minutes crawl by. You're dying.
Right. Well, that's the thing. People, read about the infamous rooms, whether it was your show of shows or The Simpsons or Late Night or SNL or Mr. Show. That, those shows were historical, but most, writing for shit your father says is not going to be magical, I would imagine.
Right.
So there's a lot of work out there, and a lot of people look at certain shows as being like the 1927 Yankees, but a lot of that just doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of pretty special rooms now. Like, I know Big Mouth has a very cool room. There's they're out there, and because there's so many more channels with so many more shows, I think that people are able to pull together. Like, have you seen that show? Is it called Someone Somewhere with Bridget Everett?
No.
Oh, you got to check that out. It's amazing. She's a kind of have you heard of her, Bridget Everett?
I've heard of her. I haven't seen the show.
Yeah, she's like a cabaret singer. She's very bawdy, and it's a show. And they brought in a theater company and writers to come in from theater.
Oh.
And it's kind of works. Like, it's a campy show. It's big.
Yes.
It's not TV, but it kind of works.
Yeah, I've actually seen the opening credits for that. And it looks like, something like a Japanese game show or something. But yeah. I mean, for a show like that, it would be amazing. But God, I've heard some stories from friends who have worked on shows, and most of which never ended up on the air. And it just sort of scared me off television.
Right. So do you think if you were offered a job writing for TV, you would take it at this point?
I don't know. If it was for, Amy Sedaris or someone I really loved and respected. But even, that was part of the reason I didn't ever apply to Letterman, because that was sort of a shock when I heard how hellish it was to write for him. I mean, that was my biggest dream.
Right.
And then to hear what that was like. No, I mean, I think at this point I'm, I do what I want to do, how I want to do it, and I don't have to answer to anyone. And I may be too old at this point to sit there and have to sit in a room with styrofoam boxes until 1 a.m.
Yeah. It is kind of a young man's sport, that's for sure, and a young woman's sport now too. So I kind of wanted to get into that a little bit. Like, I'm looking at your room. What is that? Is this your library?
This is very rare because my wife is out and my daughter is not home. So usually I have to do this from my bedroom. This is an 800 square foot apartment. So this is, I thought I would go all out for this interview. This is the living room, and this is just where I read and listen to music.
And you listen to vinyl. You got a wall of vinyl behind you.
Well, I listened as a kid, and I got into it recently again because I heard a friend's preamp and stereo system, and it blew me away. I hadn't heard, I had the same speakers since '83, and I recently got new speakers, and it's a brand new world. It's like I went into Technicolor again.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I rented an Airbnb in Brooklyn a couple summers ago, and it had a turntable and a wall full of vinyl, and I couldn't wait to get home and put on Joni Mitchell Blue and just sit in a chair and wait to have to flip sides and realize that, you know, there's a difference between side A and side B, that there was a build, that there was like a theme, that there was a reason to listen to an album and not just songs. Well,
very good reason. I mean, there's a tactile sensation, not only to the way it sounds, but you can sit on the couch, look at the album cover.
Right.
You know, just the smell of the albums I missed. And really, it's the type of thing where it's hard to get to cruising altitude with vinyl, but once you do, you will never go back because it is addictive. And you mentioned that album in particular is just, it's like a musical bath. I mean, you just sit back. It's a work of art.
It's the album where when I'm feeling depressed, because my theory on depression, and I don't know if you suffer from depression.
I do.
Yeah. And my after years of struggling with it, I realized that sometimes you have to not struggle and you have to just go down with it. Like you said, like a bath. You have to just submerge yourself in it. And when I do that, I put on that album and I just sit with some headphones on and I listen to it. I might cry, and then I take the night off, and then I'm usually a lot better the next day.
That is what I do, and actually I would recommend that. My two albums for doing that is Gordon Lightfoot, Gord's Gold, and The Carpenter's Best Of. And that will bring me back to the depression I felt as a kid, which I do think you have to sort of just go through. You can't fight it off because it's very, very powerful.
Yeah, it's flypaper. The more you struggle, the more it sticks to you. You got to just kind of realize that you just got to tell yourself, you know what? You're different than other people. That's fine. Everybody's different in different ways. And the way you are is that you get a heavy, heavy wool blanket thrown over your head randomly sometimes. And you need to take a nap when that happens. And that's it.
And I do think it's a wiring issue. I mean, the majority of the people I interviewed suffer from depression, which didn't surprise me, and anxiety. Yeah. What did surprise me was, and this is because I suffer from it too, this is the only reason I asked them, I would say 75% suffered from OCD.
Really?
And it's surprising. In fact, I reached out to Oliver Sacks, no relation, and he had not heard of a connection between OCD and comedy. I really do think there's a very strong connection. And I'm wondering if it's a wiring issue, that your brain gets wired differently and you think about things in different terms. But I don't know. I never did a scientific study, but just from talking to people, it's very common in comedy.
What's funny about it is people don't understand, well, if you have depression, how can you be funny? And what they don't realize is depression has a flip side, which is mania. And even if you're not bipolar, there's still elements of coming out of a depression and feeling light as a feather and giddy and silly and creative. And those are the moments that you seize on sitting down and actually writing and creating. And
absolutely, yeah.
And part of taking antidepressants gets rid of that mania, which is why you see so many people struggle with not taking their medications because they feel like it squashes the creativity that comes when you come out of that full-blown depression that you go down with. And that's something people struggle with.
Well, I think most people in comedy struggle with it. I certainly struggle with it. On my Instagram, I put this up a few times, on my depression meds, and I'm on full force Prozac and Wellbutrin. For some reason, it comes to me on the bottle, my depression meds, misspelled as Michael Sucks. not. And I thought and then I thought, you know what? Fuck it. I do suck sometimes. Why not just leave it?
That's hilarious.
But here's the thing I want to know, too, and I want to ask you this. Do you think that most people suffer from depression, say plumbers or electricians or surgeons, but we just don't hear about it as much as we would from a stand-up comedian or from a comedy writer?
I think that's probably true. I also think that when you lack the schedule of a plumber gets up at 5:30 in the morning and he makes his coffee and he gets in his truck and he goes to work and he has tasks that keep him busy for 8-10 hours a day. And then he comes home and he has a meal and a beer and calls it a night. When you're a comedy writer, you're sitting alone in a room, ruminating. And, people talk about, how do you get inspired to write? And anybody that writes professionally knows you don't wait for inspiration. You have to just write, because if you wait for it, then the depression kicks in and you never feel a moment where, okay, now it's time to write. So, from Ernest Hemingway to, Gary Shandling, it's like people talk about you just sit down and start typing. Just get it going. And I think that stand-up comedians are the same way. We have just a lot more downtime, and we feel things more.
Well, that's true. And I also think that there's a sense of mystery about comedy where you could be in comedy for 50 years and still not know whether a joke's going to work or not. You can be a plumber for 50 years and you know that by doing this will fix that.
Right.
So I think that sort of drives some people mad that they have a lot of experience, but there's still that unknown unknown mystery about it, especially for stand-ups. If I get up on stage, I've been doing this, say, for 40 years, am I still going to look like a fucking asshole? And that's a big thing to take with you every day, right? I mean,
It is. I walk into the Comedy Store, and in my back pocket, I got some jokes I scribbled down, and I'm going to pull them out, and I'm going to try them, and I am no closer after 30 years of doing stand-up to knowing whether that joke's going to work. I mean, I think I take better shots, but in terms of the joke actually working or having to be thrown away, it's still a 1 in 5 ratio.
Yeah, and that's my advantage because I write quietly and people usually read quietly. I don't see their reaction. I don't want to see their reaction, good or bad. I did a few live shows, which I've never done. I opened for David Sedaris in a few cities these past few months, and I'd read an upcoming book that I wrote, which is a fake college catalog. And some of the jokes, I shouldn't even say some, I say most of the jokes that I thought were, can't miss, absolutely fucking bombed.
Yeah.
And it was really an interesting lesson because when you get up too far up your own ass or in your own head, you really lose track of what's funny.
Yeah.
And you really have to pay for the consequences when you're doing it in front of people, which I had the luxury of never really having to do. So I don't envy your job. I mean, that is a tough fucking job.
I also think that when you talked earlier about like maybe you getting too old to write, part of being a writer, and I think the thing that my biggest asset as a writer was always that I had very thick skin. I could pitch, fail, pitch, fail, pitch, fail, pitch, score. And that's considered a good day. And you have to be able to face those odds in a writer's room, because if you just wait until you're absolutely sure it's a joke that'll work, you may sit in the room all day and not say anything, and it all builds. Sometimes you pitch a joke and the head writer or the showrunner kind of just goes, nah. But then somebody goes, yeah, but what if we take that and do this? And then somebody else goes, yeah, that's good. And then we add this. And all of a sudden you've got something. And it's like, it's that ability to not be afraid of the pain of the joke failing that keeps the creativity going. And the whole idea of it's improvisational. Being in a writer's room is like improv.
Right. Well, writing is too. It's improv, but it's controlled improv. Everyone improvises as a writer, but we just get rid of what doesn't work.
Right.
But what you mentioned, I think, is very true. I don't know if I could take that now if I were to pitch out 10 ideas and 9 of them would be shot down. I could, I think, when I was younger. But you get a bit set in your ways, especially when you work alone for so many years.
Yeah, sure. Right.
But then again, the magic that you mentioned, building off of one another, that magic, that spark doesn't happen when you work alone. You can't produce that. I don't know if you saw the recent Beatles documentary, but the way they worked off of each other was just magic, wasn't it? It's just amazing. And they couldn't have produced it alone. They needed to be together.
And also, it was you very rarely somebody got completely shot down. I mean, there was a thing with Paul and George where, you know, George wanted to do some things on the guitar because he'd been watching Clapton, and he wanted to start doing some more winding kind of guitar solos, and Paul was kind of shutting him down. But that was the only time you really saw it, and the rest of the time you just saw them kind of supporting and molding and shaping and moving forward with ideas. It was very interesting.
Yes, but also what interested me was there was no kiss ass. I mean, they weren't up each other's ass with compliments. You know,
Right.
Paul would play The Long and Winding Road, and George would say, "Okay, that's good," and then they'd move on to Maxwell's Silver Hammer.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
there was no sense of like, "Oh my God, that's amazing," which can be problematic too in rooms.
Yeah, well, I think the thing in the room has to be you have to give people an out for when a pitch dies. There has to be the ability to shit on that person for pitching something that was bad. And there was a bit, I remember my friend Mike Gibbons was telling me, he's a showrunner, and he was talking about when he worked on Craig Kilborn, which had an amazing writing staff that has gone on to become some of the biggest writers in LA. And they did a thing where if a guy was pitching something and it was taking a while and it wasn't going anywhere, everybody would start putting their hands on their faces and creating spider webs with their hands.
How fucking great is that? I mean, that's like being back in high school at a party and someone says a boring story and you start snoozing off.
Right.
But I think it's gone in the opposite direction now. Every idea has to be respected, even if it's a piece of shit.
I know a writer who had somebody on the staff. It was a female writer on the staff, and it was a mostly male show. And her ideas weren't getting through. And she went to Human Resources and complained, and they spoke to the head writer about putting her ideas through. It was like, hey, nobody gives a shit if you're a male or a female. It's if the idea is good. You can't fucking regulate it.
Well, that's what I wonder now with the helicopter generation who have their parents call up the deans or the professors at colleges if they get a bad grade. How are they dealing with writing rooms? How are they dealing with community? And it could be a brutal world. And I would hope that they would grow enough to know that not every idea is going to be a killer.
Right. And also learning how to score. I mean, it's like you look at athletes that go from college to pro, and they need to suddenly get a new skill set, and they need to adjust what they do so they can make it in the big leagues. And it's like, you know, if you're going to go into a writer's room, there's already going to be the guy who's the joke guy, and there's going to be the woman that's the story person, and there's going to be the person that's the structure person, and then sometimes there's the person that doesn't get a lot of jokes on, but they keep the room hot. You know, they're funny and they're shticky, and they create those bits like the spider web, and that person's an asset to the room. And you find your way on. You find what skill set are you bringing to it that's going to make you integral to this writer's room. And I have grown so much moving from show to show, and having to figure out what this show needs, what I can do, how can I challenge myself, how can I take the risks of putting myself out there and being vulnerable so that I can be useful to this show.
Right. It's like a utility player for baseball. You have to know your role. And if you have to go up there and bunt rather than hit a home run, you have to do that. But that's actually a lesson that I think a lot of young comedy writers don't know. Another lesson is how hard one has to work, even if you so-called make it. I mean, you mentioned Jack Handey earlier. He will have 2 out of 5, 3 out of 5 pieces rejected by New Yorker. Yeah. David Sedaris doesn't have every piece accepted by the New Yorker. And I can tell you from knowing David just how hard he works every single day. It's not like he became tenured like a professor and that was that. You really have to work hard, and you're going to have to work hard for the rest of your career as a comedy writer. But when you do work hard, and when you do put your head down, and when you don't give up, and when you do it for the right reasons, I think eventually you'll achieve some sort of success.
Who do you think is the most natural comedy writer you've ever interviewed?
Well, I think the most natural, just because what he writes is who he is David Sedaris.
Yeah.
I mean, that is who he is. And, you know, he didn't come up with that first major piece he wrote, Santaland Diaries, to be big on NPR and to have, you know, Alec Baldwin call him up and to be in Esquire, the New Yorker. That's just who he is. And that is, you know, he's so, that is his style, is just who he is. When I see certain styles, writing style, you can sort of tell they're either playing a role or accentuating who they are. But I think the best writers, you know, going back to Mark Twain, Gene Shepard, David Sedaris, all these amazing, you know, Woody Allen on the page, maybe less Woody Allen, but they are who they are. That's their style. Their style is who they are as a personality, and it's not a put on. And right. I think you can sense that, sort of like you can sense a character up on stage, a stand-up, who's either trying to be something that he or she is not.
Yeah. All right, so I want to talk about your new book, which I apologize. I'd read your other books, but I hadn't gotten to reading your new one yet. It's called Passing on the Right.
It's not even out yet.
Oh, no wonder I didn't read it.
I'll send you a copy.
Yeah, please. I'm dying to read it because it sounds amazing.
Well, sorry.
Oh, it's called Passing on the Right, My Ups, My Downs, My Lefts, My Rights, My Wrongs, and My Career So Far in This Bizarre World of Comedy. The Skippy Battison Story. Is that a mouthful?
Well, I wanted even the subtitle to be awful. I mean, this is a tremendously mediocre book on purpose. This guy has been described, a Fast Company wrote an article on it and described this guy as being a meteor of mediocrity, which I thought was perfection. It's sort of my take on two things. One is memoirs written by comedians that have gone to the dark side, and also to the type of person I grew up with in D.C., Brett Kavanaugh type, who went to the private schools. I went to public, but just a sort of entitled sense that he needs to make it. So it's about a very mediocre comedy writer who goes through every sort of job until he finds that the conservative side sort of clicks for him, and he becomes a big podcaster and satellite radio star.
So, in other words, when we were just talking about being a natural or writing your true self, so this is a guy who, it sounds like, lacks a true self and is absorbing an identity because he thinks it will succeed, or he's finding it succeeds. That's
completely right. He doesn't have any talent, and yet the ego that he has is astonishing.
Yeah.
And his sense of self-awareness just does not exist. Basically, what this book is an X-ray version of my interview books, where everything that I recommend in those books, I have him not do. And everything that he doesn't do, that I didn't recommend in the books, he will do. So it's just like the worst type of comedy person. Whatever he does, you should do the total opposite.
And what success? I was a little unclear on what success he really had and what he claimed to have, because it says that he wrote a joke for the Oscars, or he wrote a screenplay for The Simpsons.
Right. Well, he wrote one joke for the Oscars. He claims to have written the joke, and this is from the 1998 Oscars, where Billy Crystal sang the Titanic parody to the song of the Gilligan's Island theme song. A lot. You remember that one?
Yes, I do.
Yes, of course you do. He claims a lot of this stuff, but when you read the book, you'll see that what he claims isn't necessarily in our realm of reality.
Got it. So he's a little bit like... what was that Robert De Niro, Jerry Lewis movie?
King of Comedy.
King of Comedy. Is he a little bit like that character, Rupert Pumpkin?
He's less funny than Rupert.
Okay. But the same delusional confidence.
Total delusional. And of course, he ends up associated with the January 6th insurrection.
No, there we go. There's your Act 3.
He's caught doing a little something in Nancy Pelosi's office.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So you really finished this recently then? This is very current.
It's fresh off the press. I mean, one of the things I've been doing recently is writing these books almost like a character actor would play a role. Each of these books is written in the first person as a character. And usually they're people that I don't like, the type of person I don't like. I wrote one book called Randy, which was a found biography of this 30-something in Maryland white trash guy who put out his own memoir. But by doing this, by putting out these books, I can't really do it through traditional publishing. It has to be self-publishing. But by doing that, I can write it very quickly and get it out in a week.
Got it. Wow. All right, so let's talk about this archetype of this comedian, because we've seen it now, especially in the last couple of years, of comics that, well, it started with Dennis Miller in terms of a comedian sort of leaning into going to the conservative side and finding an audience there that was untapped, and maybe becoming radicalized by that move to the right. Who else did you see following this path?
Well, yeah, Dennis Miller's a perfect example, but to give him credit, I think he genuinely lost his mind. He wasn't doing it to get more fans. I think 9/11 zapped his brain. But you'll see, like a Jim Brewer or, all these types of comedians, especially like the ventriloquists, all seem to be very conservative. It seems to be almost...
Well, because it's not them talking.
It's Ahmed the terrorist talking.
He's talking.
It's
I'm
not
just
me.
holding him. Yeah.
I'm just a vessel of God.
God works through me, through my hand, and he says his crazy shit.
Don't look at me, people.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I see that a lot, and it's always fascinating. I mean, are they doing it because they genuinely believe this shit? Do they really believe that science isn't out there or that the COVID doesn't exist? Or are they doing it because it's just another way to get a lot of fans? But I do see the insanity in their eyes. Like Jim Brewer, he's been on videos, and I think it's like looking into someone's eyes, and he's not fully in control. It interests me. And also the guy from Mr. Show, who was actually at the insurrection. I'm forgetting his name.
Oh, Jay Johnson.
I find that fascinating. Anyone who gets... or it used to be this case. If you get into comedy, you do it for the right reasons. You're not going after the smaller people. You're going after the bigger people, things that are keeping people down. So how do you go from that to ending up attacking the fucking Capitol? It just fascinates me. But beyond that, even worse to me
well,
is
what do you think that is? I mean, answer your own question. What do you think drives somebody to start to believe that stuff? Or maybe not believe it, but maybe embrace it.
I grew up in D.C. and I have I have a few friends and some family members who do believe this stuff. And I do believe it's just them going to the same source. I remember listening to G. Gordon Liddy when I was in high school and sort of believing the shit he was saying about Vince Foster being murdered and not committing suicide.
Yeah, I remember believing it also. Yes.
Yeah, and I believed it, and I felt like I was in that world. It almost reminds me of when I got into soap operas as a kid. You find yourself into the stories, into the characters. Now you stop watching soap operas and you think, what the fuck was I doing?
Yeah.
And I think back now, it's like, did I really believe Vince Foster was murdered by the Clintons? But at that time, it's sort of punk. It's sort of beyond the mainstream. It feels very insular. You feel like you're part of that world. And I think that just humans are wired at times to be weak and to want to believe certain things. And then they double down and they can't go back. Yes,
you can't go back because there's something in our culture about being authentic. And it's a shame because there is nothing more profound than apologizing or changing opinions because you feel a different way, and or you've come upon new information and knowledge and understanding. But we are so attached to narrative. We're a storytelling culture, and not just our culture, all cultures. Yeah. Human beings sat around fires and they told stories, and they came to understand that this configuration of stars is based on this god, and and we bought all that stuff. We're wired to believe it, and I think what you say is interesting about then belonging. I think that being in the group, being in the pack, feeling the support of like-minded people, and nothing makes that group stronger than being rejected by another group.
That's right. And I think this new group that people may find themselves in, they're being surrounded by people they didn't grow up with and weren't friends with before. You know, sort of the macho types, ex-military, carrying around weapons. It's like all a big fun game. And I think it's interesting for them to sort of play dress up in this world, to be a part of something tough and to sort of take care of matters and take it into their own hands.
Right.
But you see any previous cult member, whether it's for Jim Jones or whether you see Michael Cohen, who used to work for Trump, I think you're right. There has to be
That's a cult.
Yeah, and he admits it.
Right.
That that's what I admire. When they come out of that and they say, "Listen, whatever I did under that realm, I apologize for."
Yeah.
Because to do that, especially, and you see with ex-Scientologists, to come out of 20, 30 years of telling everyone that they were wrong, and to now apologize and say, "You know what, you were right." I think that's a tremendous thing for anyone to do, and I huge admiration for that. But you really don't see it enough, and it's human nature to not want to say I was wrong.
No. To not be authentic is to be, is to not exist. You're supposed to stand for something, and
Right.
And then you see people, like Adam Carolla, who is a good friend and whose podcast I've probably done it 50 times in my life. I go on all the time because I think he's entertaining. I think he's intelligent. Do I agree with him? Mostly not. Most of the stuff he says, I don't buy. And there's times where I try not to even follow what he says in other media because some of it goes so far against what I believe. But I also believe in an exchange of ideas, and I really believe that sometimes when I'm talking to him, I say things that I see sink in. Like I make progress with him, and there's some things that he say that I go, he's kind of got a point. And so, I'd like to see more discourse between these people instead of like just that insular experience that so many of these people are getting. They're getting a podcast that gets bigger and stronger, but it also gets more exclusionary. It excludes new ideas that aren't part of their agenda.
Well, Adam interests me. I mean, does he genuinely believe in what he's saying? If so, why? Does it have to do with a difficult childhood? Does it have to do with this, or does it have to do with that?
Yeah, it seems a lot of it has to do with his childhood. And there's also there's the California man. It's the Clint Eastwood, it's the Ronald Reagan, it's this bootstraps, pick yourself by the bootstraps kind of California mentality. I think it comes from, the West, this sort of origin story of California. And, it's people think of this as a blue state, but there is a red streak that runs through it.
That's right. And you'll see that red streak going through any blue state. It depends on where even in Maryland, where I'm from, you go 30 miles west of D.C., it's going to be red, or 40 miles, whatever it is.
Yeah, right.
But I don't even mind someone like Adam. If someone actually believes it, I think you're right. You can talk to them and you can see the light going off in their eyes. What bothers me, and I grew up around this, is a Roger Stone, is a Donald Trump. They don't believe this shit.
They don't believe it. They don't
believe it. They just don't. And the fact that they're still saying what they're saying to people who do believe it, that to me is the danger.
It is a danger. It's more than a danger. It is tearing us apart. There are people that are taking advantage of these dynamics that we just talked about people needing to believe a narrative and needing to belong to a group. And there are people out there that get these mindsets and play into them and manipulate people.
Right, and this is really what I've noticed with comedy in the past few years. I think the guy's name is Gutfeld or Jesse something on Fox. I don't know if you've seen
Gutfeld?
Yeah, then Jesse something.
Oh.
He goes to these places, whether it's Penn Station or whether it's Chinatown. Have you seen these reports that he's done? I had never really seen anything quite like this. So he went to Penn Station and basically mocked the homeless.
Mm-hmm.
And then he went to Chinatown and was imitating accents and, you know, using the sound of a gong and doing karate moves. Like, I have seen that before. I just haven't seen an audience for it. And that's really what kind of scares me now, is that you would put this shit out there. It's not clever. There's no jokes to it. Right. But that you would then acquire an audience of millions who enjoy this type of shit. Yeah. That to me was new. I hadn't really seen that reaction before.
Well, it is interesting because when you look at, you know, going back to Andrew Dice Clay and a guy who was clearly doing a character, but at the same time, his audience was, there's perception and there's intention. And what he was intending, I don't think was 30,000 people in Madison Square Garden that were all male that were rejoicing in this kind of misogyny. I don't know that that's what he set out to achieve. But when he did achieve it, he embraced it. You know, I think The Man Show with Jimmy Kimmel and Carolla, I think they set up to do a satirical show making fun of what if men ran their own show. How ridiculous would it be to have women on trampolines and all that stuff? But it was taken, not entirely, but there was a good section of that audience that there was no irony to it for them.
Right. It became like the humor you would see in Maxim or Gear magazine. I mean, that's a perfect example of Andrew Dice Clay. I remember him defending his comedy, saying it's just a character. But then I would watch his specials, and when he made jokes, say, about a 7-Eleven worker being the color of urine, and the crowd gives him a standing ovation, they're not applauding the character. They're applauding the fact that he's saying these 7-Eleven workers are not American and they look like a certain type of person. And you're exactly right. He got into it. God knows why he got into it. But the fact that he kept going forward always sort of bothered me.
Yeah, and I remember at that time being in Boston, and it was a very split. There were two camps of comedians in Boston. There was David Cross and Cross Comedy, and they used to go on stage and do parodies of Kinison and Dice Clay, and they were tearing it down. And then the other half of town was these kind of saloon comedy and dick jokes and people that thought that Kinison was the greatest thing they'd ever seen. And I was in both. I was in both camps. I thought he was fucking hilarious. I thought the character was great. I thought his delivery was great. And some of the early stuff I really thought, like, in an ironic way, was very funny. And then I got horrified by what it morphed into.
Well, you can easily be confused with what you're satirizing. I mean, online, I've had quite a few people reach out to me who are conservatives thinking this is a pro-conservative book.
Right.
It's anything but that. And, like, you know, that's when you say David Cross and what he was doing, he was making fun of or going after a certain type of comedy. I always wonder, like, if what I do is too up its own ass. You know, if I would sell more books, if it would just be, this is a comedy book and this is, you know, Trump's fake tweets or whatever, you know, or cats versus dogs or historical Facebook posts. But a lot of times I think people are just sort of perplexed by these books I write in character, not really knowing quite what it is or which side they should fall on, or should they laugh at this or should they not laugh at that. And it's just something I think about. Yeah, it's a little bit
hard to unpack, but, you know, we talked about writing your truth, and you've clearly come across something that satisfies you, writing in this style that's so satirical and taking on personas is something that's what you do. And it, you know, people find it or they don't, but that's what, you know, you're being your authentic self.
True, but when you start confusing the people who should get it, like I was interviewed the other day, actually by a friend of mine, and he compared me with Henry Darger. You know Henry Darger?
No.
He was the outsider artist who painted. He was a recluse, lived in an attic, worked as a janitor, and created his own worlds, oftentimes by painting little penises on images of girls. So the fact that my friend is comparing me to Henry Darger, I don't know. I mean, these books are never going to be found in the airport bookstore. They're never going to be found on Oprah. But if they do reach a certain amount of people, like the books that I read growing up, whether it's National Lampoon's High School Yearbook or Don Novello's The Blade, or any of that, that's fine with me. I don't mind reaching out to just a certain number of people, but there does seem to be a confusion now, and I'm not sure if it's my inability to produce this. It probably is, or people not being used to satirical type books anymore, like the satirical National Lampoon of the early 70s with Michael O'Donoghue putting out the Vietnamese Baby book. Do you remember that?
No.
And very dark jokes like the first footprints, and it was just one footprint because the other one had been blown off in a mine. You know, that sort of slash and burn type of satire I don't think people are used to anymore, but it's really the type that I love, and really it means a lot to me.
It's true. I mean, comedy, the tone of comedy changes over time, and it's cyclical, you know, and that type of Mr. Show comedy, that type of, you know, Monty Python comedy, it's not, people don't always get it. People don't always thirst for it. So right now, people want TikTok. They want immediate, easy to understand, easy to digest, easy to forget and move past. It's disposable. And stuff that you have to unravel and think about, yeah, that's tough. I mean, even the thing that your publicist sent me, he sent me a one sheet with some blurbs from the book, and at first I didn't get it. It took me a minute, but that's what I like. I like to work for it a little bit.
But people don't. And, you know, I think, especially when I write a book that's 450 pages, you know, people may come to it in the future. It's just, I've, you know, we're talking about depression and anxiety. I've been hard on myself these past few days. It's like, what the fuck did I just spend the past 8 months doing here? And will anyone get it? And is it worth it? And I guess that's nothing new for people in comedy. It's just you don't want to produce something that's so out of left field that they're just going to look at it like a foreign object. Right,
right. But I would imagine most artists feel that way when they put something out because they've taken a risk, you know? Yeah.
And I think you have to. I mean, all the great ones did it. Steve Martin did it. Richard Pryor, George Carlin. There was a schism between what they were doing at first and who they became.
Yeah.
And I think you really do have to hold true to who you are as a creative person, whether people come to it or not.
Well, my friend, I hope people come to it. I can't wait to read it. It sounds like, I mean, it's a story of today. It's very much a look at a lot of the kind of podcasts that people are watching right now, and YouTube videos, and I think it, you know, and stand-up comedy. It's all about this seismic shift to the right, and this movement in this country to people getting into pack mentalities. And this is a guy who manipulates that and radicalizes, I guess is the word, right?
Right. My press person asked me, wait, so this guy is a real asshole, right? And I said, he's the biggest fucking asshole. He goes, how do you expect me to sell this book? So I do
right.
I do hope
well,
people
hey, Confederacy of Dunces. I mean, Ignatius Riley was, not a great guy.
Well, that is a book I have a very personal relationship with. He went to Tulane, and so did I.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
As a kid, I would read his the first drafts that they have on the Tulane Library.
Wow.
And it's incredible. And there is someone who was a genius who killed himself before he ever, and that book could have very easily never been published.
And after he died, it won the Pulitzer Prize.
It won the Pulitzer. His mom was the one who pushed for. She went to Walker Percy himself and gave him the musty book.
And he was a professor at Tulane at the time, right?
No, he was at Loyola.
Okay.
Yeah, but right next to it. Yeah, so that is like, I think that's a perfect example. It's just like that book has meant so much to me, and he's such an unlikable character, but you have to love him in some ways, right? I mean, you just have to.
Well, is this character lovable? Is there a part of him that has humanity?
No. No, I mean, he sleeps with underage. Well, he's a fucking monster.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
I mean, yeah.
I love it. Well, I can't wait to read it. All right, listen, Mike Sachs, congratulations on your continued success, how prolific you are, and And again, like, get this book, but also get these 2 books, Poking a Dead Frog, and here's the kicker: if you're interested in comedy writing, theory of comedy, getting to know some of the people that have been groundbreaking in comedy, you do great explorations with them, and it's a great body of work.
Thank you so much. When I was told that you wanted me to have me on your show, I was very, very excited. I mean, I had such a great time 10 years ago, and I just really appreciate you having me back on.
Of course, man. Anytime.
Thank you so much.
See you again soon. Okay.
All right.
Take care. Thanks,
take care.
Mike Sachs.
Thank you.